What will your future look like? The job you do today could be different than the jobs of tomorrow. Some see this as a challenge. At UCF, we see opportunity. A chance for you to grow your knowledge and strengthen your skills from anywhere life might take you. With in-demand degree programs and resources for your success, UCF Online can help you prepare for the future and all the possibilities that come with it.
From the University of Central Florida's Center for Distributed Learning, I'm Tom Cavanaugh.
And I'm Kelvin Thompson.
And you're listening to Topcast, the teaching online podcast. Hello, Kelvin.
Hey, Tom. How are you? And I mean that sincerely. How are you? Because I saw that social media post that you posted recently, and it worried me a little bit about you.
That was a bit of fun.
Okay.
Yeah, I made myself a little meme of how perhaps I may be deteriorating through self-isolation, but I'm fine, thank you.
It scared me a little bit. You look kind of like the Unabomber or something.
That was what I was going for, yeah. I even made a reference to manifesto in the caption.
I saw that. And I'm like, that's not really, I think that is Tom. Oh, no, yes. That's scary.
Although, how much of a Unabomber can you be wearing your canvas hoodie? So
more than you would think.
Maybe.
More than you would think.
Yeah, I did get it up there in the mountains.
Well, there you go. That's it. I guess we should say, because we haven't done this in a while, for those newer to the podcast, this is a twice-monthly collegial conversation about online education conducted over a shared cup of coffee. Of course, we should say we do usually share the cup of coffee because we're usually sitting across from each other in our tiny, slightly too warm audio booth at UCF. But currently, as we record this, we continue to be working remotely due to the COVID-19 coronavirus, and we're recording from our individual locations, so we have our individual cups of coffee, but we'll still share the conversation.
That is the plan. For anybody that might be new to the podcast, welcome. And grab a cup and pull up a virtual chair. Take a listen like all the rest of us are virtual.
Although I've been kind of virtual standing desking myself, trying to be a little, less deep vein thrombosis and a little bit more health,
Yeah, good for you. I am not. I am sitting, although I'm trying to get a little exercise daily. Emphasis on good. Little.
Yeah, I got you.
So, Kelvin, I've seen your cup a couple of times because we are looking at each other.
That's right.
Across the miles. What is in your cup? Thermos.
Yes, thank you.
Vessel of choice.
Vessel of choice. I did pour into my cup here some leftover Atomic Coffee Roasters coffee from back in, what was that? Was that the DL Fees episode maybe back in, was that 62? Is that when we used, I don't even know when we used the Atomic coffee, but I have some leftover, so here it is here. What's in your cup?
So I'm drinking a decaffeinated French roast, and it's good. It's strong, but it's good. No flavor today. You'll be pleased to know. Just the
coffee.
Just the coffee. A little creamer, a little sweetener, but nothing too crazy. It's good. I think of note though is my mug. So I have this nice ceramic mug with a top on it from Café du Monde in New Orleans, and this was a gift from the lovely and talented Julie Uranus, vice president from UPSIA. I co-facilitated a workshop with Sasha Thackerberry and Jason Ruckert at the last UPSIA Solar Conference in New Orleans, and this was a nice thank you from Julie and UPSIA, and I've been using it regularly since I've been kind of sequestered here in Chateau Cavanaugh.
That's cool. Do you have some beignets to go with that?
Just a picture on the side, which looks lovely. But no, haven't had one since I've been back. And then the ironic thing is that I didn't even have one when I was there. Because how could you go to New Orleans and not have a beignet? But I didn't because I actually got the flu. This is all pre-coronavirus, but I got the flu.
I remember that. Yeah. I remember that. You went out of town and came back with the flu. That's not good.
I felt bad. But
literally.
I feel good now.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, keep feeling good. As a colleague of ours, who, if I named her, you would know her, said on a state conference call not long ago, the new phrase should be "stay negative."
Stay negative. I like that. That's very good. I might have a few guesses who might have said that. That's pretty good.
But it was funny. It was funny. I liked it. So I guess maybe we should say that today we are continuing on with our second episode of the month being wrapped around an interview. And so while we will mention our ongoing COVID-19 stuff, as long as that's ongoing, it'll be the top of the month where we focus in on that. But I think that today's already in the can interview is really relevant to our COVID-19 response, because we're going to speak with a guest about practical strategies faculty can take in humanizing the online teaching and learning process. Now that's good. That's a good thing to do anytime, even for, real online courses that are professionally designed and supported. But, I keep thinking it's almost an audible outcry in the community for humanizing amidst all of the emergency remote teaching.
Yeah, it's true. And then, of course, you spoke to the expert in that, Dr. Michelle Pacansky-Brock. You spoke to her during the last OLC Accelerate meeting that was in the fall of 2019. Yeah. And in fact, we made reference to Michelle in the last episode, episode 63, when we were talking about the kind of field report from remote teaching and learning due to the coronavirus and the importance of a humanizing approach to online education. And as you say, whether you were prescient or we were lucky to get Michelle to do that interview, and maybe because of our backlog, the universe has conspired to make sure it came out at an appropriate time. But yeah, she's awesome. Maybe I should do her abbreviated bio.
Yeah, please.
Before we get into the interview. So for those of you who don't know Michelle, Dr. Michelle Pacansky-Brock, better known perhaps by her internet handle Brocansky, is a faculty mentor with the California Virtual Campus Online Education Initiative, or CVC-OEI, online network of educators at one. That's like @ONE. She is highly regarded as a thought leader in the field of online education. She writes thoughtfully. She has received awards and is just generally a person who walks the talk. And we can link to her full and very impressive bio in the show notes. We were very fortunate to have Michelle come and speak at a conference we recently hosted on campus for people around the state who are responsible for training faculty to teach online. I had the honor of introducing her. And her keynote was just right on the money. It was exactly what I think that audience needed to hear. So we're big fans, and as you said, I think this interview comes at a particularly auspicious time.
Yeah, I agree with all that, and we don't always plug this, but you can find our show notes on the web at topcast.online.ucf.edu, and you should go check out info about Michelle and some of the other things that we talk about during the interview. We're going to have links to there as well. So it'll be resource rich, I suspect.
So maybe with that intro and no further ado through the wonders of podcast time travel, here is your interview with Dr. Michelle Pacansky-Brock.
So glad to have you here on Topcast. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you so much, Kelvin.
So we were talking for just a few minutes before I hit record about a central theme or a trajectory in your work over the years of humanizing online education. Do you mind if I just ask, what pulled you into that direction?
That's a really good question. I'm glad you started with that question because it takes me back to when I actually was teaching online myself. When I started teaching online around 2003, 2004, I was teaching full-time at a community college in California and started teaching online and really felt very disconnected from my students, which was important to me in the classroom. Right. And I started experimenting a lot with different tools, and I was very intrigued with using voice. And I was at that time, mixing MP3s and using Audacity, and started doing just announcements that I'd type up and then I'd speak them in audio.
Right.
And then I noticed students reaching out, like saying, "Oh, it sounds like you have a cold. Are you feeling okay?" And just these really interesting connections. And then started using asynchronous tools like VoiceThread that enabled conversations between me and my students, and between my students, and collecting data, just surveys at the end of the term. I remember one student saying, "I recognized a student in our class when I was at my son's Taekwondo class just because of the sound of her voice." Wow. And those connections, those human connections, that when any one of us thinks back to college, it's those human connections that make us feel welcome, make us feel included, and help us understand that we really can achieve, that we, to believe in ourselves. And I wanted that for online. And over the years, just kind of kept prodding at it, but looked at a lot of the work around social presence, which obviously supports all of that. Yeah. But it really, for me, and I think for many, many, many of my colleagues in California, looking at the way that humanized online teaching supports students from marginalized groups, which is so important, particularly in the California community college system, where 67% of our students identify as an ethnic minority. And the problems that we see with success, the equity gaps that exist face-to-face are accentuated, as we know, in online courses. And that's not something we should hide. It's something that we need to really target, because online courses are so important for our students who don't have the privilege to be on campus all the time. So that's where we're really focused now, in my role in the California community college system, is really trying to understand, really trying to measure. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence about humanizing, but now we have a grant, and we're looking at the impact of humanized instruction on online STEM courses, which I think is going to be fascinating over the next 2.5 years. We have an intersegmental team looking at that. So lots of interesting things, I think, that will be coming in the future. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, we need to follow back up with you down the road on that work. Would really be interested to hear how that plays out. I thought, I might ask, given your deep and long work in this area, for our combined audience of online learning leaders, instructional designers, and online and blended teaching faculty, I wondered, from your experience, what advice would you give for better humanizing online education at whatever level those audiences are connecting, whether it's kind of shaping an initiative, or designing courses, or teaching the courses, or supporting the teaching of the courses, or whatever.
So I think that where we see the most success is when, or I should say the greatest adoption of humanizing practices, is when anyone at the institution really understands intrinsically where the carrot is. And when looping back to the equity gaps in online teaching, online education, online courses, I should say, that is both our carrot and our stick. I think it's clear when we disaggregate success data that we have a problem, and if we want to improve that, which I hope intrinsically we as humans see the importance of this as a social justice issue, really, that's what propels us. And so I think that what I found very helpful in having conversations with educators is to think about the paradigm of higher education that we've been in for the past many, many decades, which is really focused on equality. Oftentimes, when we enter conversations about equity, I'll hear faculty say, "Oh, I treat all my students the same." And I think that fundamentally that's a problem, because when we treat all of our students the same, when we try to be fair around being equal, what we're doing is we're saying that all of our students are the same, and all of our students are not the same. We have very diverse needs within our student groups, And so for that reason, we need to make that paradigm shift from equality to equity. And equity is really about being sure that every student has access to what they need to succeed. And many of our students need that connection to a human. They need to know there's someone on the other side of the screen that cares about their learning, that is there for them, and that will support them. And in online courses, if that's not intentionally constructed, then it's very, as we know, very isolating, and more students will not log in again if they don't feel that kind of, that sense that there's someone at the other side that cares.
No, that's such an important distinction, the equality versus equity mindset. That's ponderable, right? I remember reading an anecdote once that I've used in a different context. It's like a doctor's waiting room, filled with patients, and the nurse walks out. Okay, there's a person with a broken arm, there's a person with a burn, there's a person with, and the nurse walks out and says, okay, today we're handing out Pepto-Bismol, so everybody has the same, the same treatment.
I've heard of that with a Band-Aid, same kind of thing.
They don't all have the same needs.
Yeah, and I think the other important part of that, and this is getting even harder work, is the self-work that comes along with that, because so many educators in higher education come into this conversation through a very privileged lens, right? Acknowledging that I'm white, I'm a cisgender woman, I'm middle class, I have an abled body, and all of those things. I mean, that's something that I continue to think about every single day and try to understand. So acknowledging that while I'm not an expert at this, I'm learning, understanding what my own racial identity means and the privileges that it affords to me, and by not saying that I can ever understand the realities of other people, but stepping into that struggle and trying to make that part of what I do every day is something that I try very hard to commit to.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think that's a good reminder. So how does that shift in paradigm mindset from equality to equity, what strategies does that give rise to for our listeners to pursue adopting?
Yeah, so I do have some concrete strategies that I'm just want to talk about briefly. And I think that these strategies will help to illuminate what I mean when I say that humanized online teaching is really the connective tissue that supports the success of marginalized students. And the first practice that we've seen a lot of interest in in faculty that kind of turn their head and go, oh, that sounds interesting, which is important, is the idea of a liquid syllabus.
Liquid syllabus.
Yeah, a lot of times, when we look at rubrics around course quality, we see like, oh, pre-course contact is important. And that's very true, but we really want to untangle like, okay, well, how can we do that better? How can we humanize pre-course contact? And so many of our students today are using their phones for, getting those pre-course contact if it's an email message. And so what can we do? So what we imagine, what if in that email on a phone, a student were to simply have the option to click and open a fully public liquid syllabus that's designed with a website tool, not like a PDF or and not locked inside a learning management system, because if you're designing with the web in mind, you're actually creating content that's responsive to a phone, right? And then they can scroll and have direct access to really important information. But most importantly, we think, is at the very top, embedding a friendly, brief, welcome video from an instructor. So the very first thing from the very first tap the student is seeing is, that's my instructor. They can see, they can hear. Of course, accessible also, everything. The tool itself has to be accessible, which is important in making those decisions. We're actually encouraging faculty to dabble with Google Sites with some key strategies to design for accessibility. But having that warm invitation, and then being sure that everything in that liquid syllabus is written in we like to use the phrase hopeful language instead of instead of like, you're not going to do this and don't do this and, avoid the red text.
Right.
It's more about ensuring that when the students look at the language, they not only feel included, but they can see themselves succeeding in it. And
Right.
so that's the first strategy. And then the second strategy is when they actually get into the course. We like to really encourage students to have the opportunity to complete a survey, like a getting to know you survey in the first week that they get points for. So they're earning points and they get, that confidence of actually, doing something right away, immediate. And that survey goes from the student to the instructor. It's not anonymous, so the instructor does know who fills those surveys out. But it provides the instructor with really important information, of course, which can be customized, but some of the questions could be, what's your preferred first name? Can you give me any tips for pronouncing it? What's your preferred gender pronouns? My two favorite questions, the first one is, in one word, tell me how you're feeling about this course. And then the second question is, share one thing that you think might interfere with your success in this course. And those two last questions lead into the next practice that we're starting to call adaptive teaching.
Okay.
We get a lot of pushback from faculty in talking about humanizing, because they say, how can I bring my human presence and really be warm and caring for all my students? So there's things that we can do across, at the one-to-many level, like the liquid syllabus, like brief humanized videos, which is a big part of it, as I said, with the liquid syllabus. But so I think about, I try to get faculty to think about, if you walk out into a garden and you have a limited amount of water, so you've got a jug full of water, and you've got all these plants or all these flowers, you're not going to go up to every single flower and give that flower the same amount of water. You're going to take a step back and think, okay, which ones need it the most? And so, we look at our online courses and we know that, some students are going to succeed and some students need more support. And particularly in that first week, when you identify the students who say that they're feeling nervous or that they're feeling anxious, or when you look at what might impede their success, you'll find students who'll say, I'm pregnant and I'm going to deliver mid-semester, or, I'm working full-time and I have 3 kids, and my mom's on hospice. And all these commitments that help you understand their stories and help you see your students for more than just names on a screen, but what they're bringing to the table. It helps you to understand who needs that human touch from you the most. And so that's where you might record actually a personal video, or if you're going to send an email, put the student's name in the email and say, checking in on you. And if you keep that data available throughout the course, we use Canvas in our system, and there's a simple way to turn on a notes column in the Canvas grades area. And if you were to plug in those notes there, and as the course continues, like if you're at week 12 and that one student all of a sudden is no longer engaging like she had, you might reference the notes section and reach out to her individually and say, hey, I remember that you had this going on. How are things going? I'm just thinking about you. And those are the things that really matter. Those are the things that will pull students back in. We see lots of anecdotal evidence from folks who have taken, we have a 4-week humanizing course that we offer in the California Community College system, and lots of people who say, oh, I just got an email from a student who said they were going to drop until they saw my video. It really does pull some students back in. And I think sadly, a lot of them, it does that because they don't expect it. They don't often get that high touch in online courses. So those are, I think, my 3 strategies. I have a lot more, but liquid syllabus, the getting to know you survey, and then using your adapting your teaching to be sure that your high touch interaction supports the students who benefit the most.
Those are awesome. That is so good. Clearly, you've thought about this a lot over the years and have refined some things. And I didn't ask you this beforehand, so I'm putting you on the spot about this a little bit. I know that in the past, you mentioned your systems humanizing course. I know that you've been involved in other kind of open courses around the humanizing topic. Is there anything still out there that folks could avail themselves of?
So glad you asked. Actually, one of the very wonderful things about the team that I'm working on, CVC OEI and the California Community College System, which, by the way, can I just say that we received the Excellence in Faculty Development Award at OLC OLC Accelerate this year. So very, very proud and excited of our team. We offer many professional development courses that are at a low cost, and then we have some of those prepared for adoption. So the Humanizing course is actually accessible in the Canvas Commons publicly and can be adopted and adapted. It's shared with a CC BY, a Creative Commons Attribution license.
Great.
So just follow the attribution guidelines, and it can be adopted and facilitated at any institution.
Oh, wonderful. That's a gift to the community. Thank you and your colleagues for that. We'll make sure that we put in the episode show notes a link to that and related materials. Thank you so much. We've got to have you back on Topcast if you're willing to just to follow up. There's so much more that we could talk about, both in the follow-up to the STEM work that you were talking about and others. So this is such important work that you and your colleagues do. Thank you so much for sharing it, and thanks for being on Topcast.
Thank you so much, Kelvin, for all you do too.
So, Kelvin, that was your interview with Michelle Pacansky-Brock. I enjoyed listening to her. I think she's full of wisdom and practical tips. And sort of speaking of which, she had 3 specific tips that she talked to you about. I don't know. Do you want to kind of summarize those? I thought those were worth repeating for emphasis.
Yeah, and I know the first one, the idea of promoting a so-called liquid syllabus, which I think is a very interesting term. I think that's kind of something that she's used that phrase before, and there's definitely stuff that you can find online about that, little YouTube videos and tip sheets and stuff on her website and elsewhere. We'll find some good versions of that and stick it on. At One, I think, has some Google Site stuff to get you started with making a so-called liquid syllabus. So that idea of kind of dynamic and responsive and online and not locked up in a formal document kind of a way, that's her first practical tip. And then that idea of that getting to know you survey to really get some good intel from students with an eye toward seeing them as individuals, your students, and that which leads you to the third thing, which is that what she calls adaptive teaching, where you don't just teach to the room, so to speak, to the cohort, but actually teach to individuals. And if somebody's having difficulty, you kind of remind yourself, well, what's going on with it? Who are they again specifically? What's going on in their life? And you could actually reach out. I thought those were really good practical tips.
Yeah, and that was her point of equality versus equity. Yeah. And, the idea of getting to know you survey, she also brought that in with the idea of kind of keeping notes on your students. And like if you hadn't heard from somebody in a while, check in and say, hey, I remember you told me your grandmother was sick. Is everything okay? I noticed you haven't been involved in the discussion board. I mean, can you imagine having a professor reach out to you and say those kinds of things? It certainly wasn't my experience in higher ed, but I think what a huge difference that would make for somebody who's maybe kind of on the razor's edge of, am I going to continue or not?
Yeah, I like to think so, especially in the community college setting, open access institutions, especially where that can make a difference. And to her point, with where there are some equity differentials with disadvantaged populations, that kind of a scaffolding, a person humanizing scaffolding could really make a difference. I'll say that I think this is true. Our colleagues, Dr. Patsy Moskal and Dr. Chuck Jubin, I think historically in their evaluation work at UCF, we haven't seen as much of those kinds of gaps at UCF as a lot of places report in the literature, but I still think they're really wonderful practices. I aspire to that when I am teaching online, but I think Michelle has it down to a science, I think.
Yeah, I like to think I'm a pretty good online teacher, but I don't think so after listening to her. And then also, I mean, I had the advantage of watching her keynote here, where she showed some videos of some practices that faculty have done. These opening videos that they do, where they kind of introduce the course and themselves, and give a little history of their lives and why this subject is so important. And I mean, they're just phenomenal. And the ability that modern learning management systems have. So we use Canvas, but I'm sure they all do this. You can so quickly just record a little video and just be present in the course, or provide video feedback on an assignment. There's a huge difference in seeing somebody's face, hearing their voice as they talk to you about, here, you did this well, and I think you could have improved in this part of your paper or whatever, as opposed to just reading some kind of random notes that might be, in a track changes or something like that.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I always have to counterbalance that in my head so quickly, though, with accessibility concerns and just being mindful of it's not so at the individual feedback level. As long as you're really on it, then that's probably not as much of an issue, right? Because if I know that student Tom doesn't have any major accommodation requirements or accessibility difficulties, then fine. But if I know that he does, then I need to tailor accordingly, which is a good thing. I thought just her survey questions were brilliant. Those couple of one-word things.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about this course?
Yeah.
One thing that could interfere with your success. That's just elegant.
Yeah, it was really good. Yeah, as you said, elegant. It's very efficient. I think you can get a lot of information in a very short amount of time. That can be really useful later. When I think about what we do for UCF Online and success coaching, we have the coaches do an awful lot of that kind of work, where we talk to them about, why are you going back to school? What's your study plan? And how can you set up an environment and a program that's going to allow you to be successful? And then they remember that, they keep notes on that, and then later when somebody's struggling, maybe 3 classes later. So this is what Michelle's talking about, is stuff within a class mostly, but say 3 classes later in a program, somebody hasn't registered for courses yet. The success coach will reach out and be like, "Hey, is everything okay?" And they might be struggling. It's like, "Hey, remember you're doing this for your daughter." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I need to remember why I'm doing this and not get caught up in the day-to-day, and keep your eye on sort of on the long-term prize." All of that, I think, is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I totally agree. I know that you were thinking too about making a little plug about something that we're doing here at a larger scale to try to be mindful of hearing and attending to that student voice.
Yeah, I did want to just mention the fact that that we're in the process right now of collecting data in a student survey to see student impacts due to the COVID-19 coronavirus. Everybody is remote working, remote learning, remote teaching, and students in particular have felt the brunt of this, because so many of them have lost jobs. They have been completely disrupted. Our students were told during spring break not to come back, and in many cases are without resources like computers and textbooks and other kinds of materials. Their final art projects or portfolios, senior design projects in computer science. So we have prepared a survey, and we've sent it out to all students to ask them a couple of questions about just how they're adjusting to this. And there's a couple of, Likert scale questions and a couple of free response. And then the free response, oh my gosh, it'll be a while before we can dig through that. Dr. Patsy Moskal is coordinating all that. And she said, if anybody wants a dissertation, there's a dissertation's worth of data in there, because somebody's going to have to dig through that and try to come up with themes and things. But so far, the response has been pretty enormous. In less than a week, we've had 6,600 responses from students, which is higher than our typical student response to surveys. There may be some selection bias, because the students who are probably most affected might be most motivated to respond. But early results, and we're still collecting data, but all the things you might expect, that there's a lot of digital divide sort of issues, and somebody didn't have a webcam because they didn't know they were going to have to take a proctored test when they signed up for this course last fall.
Sure.
And you name it, everything in the middle. But it underscores the anxieties that students are going through right now outside of the classroom, and underscores the importance of faculty having sort of a humanized mindset in dealing with students who are going through all these issues in their lives.
Yeah, well said. Well, shall I perhaps try to put a button on it?
Please
I know we're running. I haven't run out of my coffee yet, so I could stay here for another hour or so talking to you. But I think we've run out of our listeners' attention spans, probably. So I guess we should try to land the plane. So, as you say, emphasizing the human and the humane, we might say, within our technology-mediated learning environments is a good idea at any time. But as so many more faculty and students engage with ad hoc remote teaching and remote learning due to COVID-19, prioritizing concepts like empathy and equity are all the more important. And again, go look at the show notes. There's some rich resources there for yourself and your colleagues to make use of in doing just that.
Yeah,
how's that?
If you're a faculty member, keep in mind that every one of your students has a unique, idiosyncratic set of circumstances that they are dealing with right now. And just be human. Just be human.
It's okay if rigor lags behind the emphasis on humanity.
I agree. I hope all of our faculty agree as well.
They don't all agree, Tom. They don't all agree.
I've had some conversations. But most do, I think. Most do.
Yes.
All right. So thank you to Michelle, and thank you, Kelvin, for the interview.
Yeah.
So until next time for Topcast, I'm Tom.
I'm Kelvin.
See ya.